This morning, are y'all, we're in Texas, right? So are y'all ready for the word? All right, because this gentleman that's going to be speaking this morning, see, I already gave it up. It's a gentleman. He knows how to bring this word to life, and it's amazing how much downloaded in him he gets from the Heavenly Father. Sometimes it's not fair because how he teaches makes me jealous. So give it up for Pastor Errol.
Be jealous. That's great. You know, when I was a boy, now this is a true story. When I was a boy, they went around the class. This is like first grade Sunday school teaching. And they said, if you could have one thing from the Lord, what would it be? And I think the pastor just had preached on Solomon. I'm serious. And I said, wisdom. I had no clue what I was asking for when I was 7 years old. I didn't say I applied it all the time, but I try. And that's the one thing I really did ask for. I said, I want wisdom. I want wisdom because if I can at least take the word apart in a certain way, it will be enjoyable for those who hear and for me to listen to myself. You may not be like me. You may not like to hear yourself ever on voicemail or anything else. I would listen to myself when I was young all the time preach, and I'd say, oh, quit saying that. Or, that was a good statement. And not just a little bit. I'm not talking about a little bit. You got to realize the first probably 5 years of preaching in the pulpit, I did probably 500 sermons because you had Sunday night, and Wednesday night teaching. And so on Sunday night, it was always the faithful. And that's what it's just what it was. It was always the faithful. On Sunday morning, you'd have a few extras. That's always the way it was. And on Wednesday night, it was the core. That's all you ever preached to is the core. So I always took Wednesday night and I took the word apart. And especially when I was young, I would take the word apart. And then in that group of people, I had historians with their doctorate in it. That's not fair. I literally had a historian who had his doctorate, yet he was the athletic director of the community. He was the athletic director for the school, and he was in charge of everything. And his wife had a master's in English. He had a doctorate in history. So if I did any historical thing biblically, I had better research. During that time, I was actually trying to finish my degree in college, in Bible college. And so I started when I was 18, and I stopped, and I restarted, then I stopped. And then after Dean and I think it was Charity was born, I said, I'm going back, and I'm gonna stay some more. And so in 96, I went back for the next 3 years to try to conclude my degree. And I did. And then in 2002, there was an opportunity for me to go to Greece, Turkey, and Italy to study. And I went back to the elders at that time. I said, I'd really like to go. It's about $3,500, but I don't have the money, but we can at least do it. This was 20 years ago. And so they said, we're going to do that. We're going to send you. So they did, because they knew that basically the end of my teaching had come. All that I really understood had come. Even though I'd been to Bible college and seminary and all that, the end of my teaching had come. And so what I did, though, from that point on was important to me. I got really close to the people who were teaching. Literally. Now, how do you get in the shadow of somebody? You actually stand right by them and you do the journey with them. So all the time we were on any of these journeys, I was standing right by the professors. Every single time. The year and a half later, in 2004, Dean and I got to go to Israel in November of 2004. And 16, 18 months later, I was in Israel for 2 weeks. And we studied. And the gentleman who taught was a university professor from Jerusalem. And everybody knew him. Everybody knew him. And it was fantastic. And so instead of being at the back of the pack and holding a recorder up and listening, I stood right next to him. When we went up to Beth-Shen and went up to the top of the mountain of Beth-Shen, I was step in step with him. He was 66 or 7 years of age, and he was hard to keep up with. He just had a lot going on, but I never forget the words. I had all that information, and it's fantastic. It just poured in. So when I look at the word, it just jumps up, and it jumps out. And then in 2010 is when I had the real revelation of the exchange. Because of going through events in 2009, we came to the place in 2010 where I was done doing ministry like we had done. And some of y'all were around during some of that time, so you know. But when I got around Wayne Niffen and he started sharing things on another level and teaching the exchange of 2 Corinthians chapter 5, starting with verse 17. And actually the verse just a few before that says we don't look at Jesus like we once did in the flesh. We look at him according to the nature of the Spirit and according to his new nature. And that's how we're supposed to look at each other now. It was amazing. It was amazing. So there's many times when we're teaching and we're going through, it's stuff not only that you've learned through time and age, it's actually living it out. Something that's, the best songs are the ones lived, right? I mean, let's just be honest. Aren't the best songs the one that's lived? That's why sometimes when my girls were growing up as teenagers, they would say, Dad, you got to listen to this song. And I'd go, you know, the only problem with that song, it doesn't fit who we are. And I just shut it off. And they're like, but it's catchy. I said, yes. Is that who you want to be? Well, no. Because I promise you, whatever you're feeding on is what you're growing in. Let me say that again. Whatever you're feeding on is what you're growing in. We came back from Kenya just not even a month ago, and we had been eating organically for a whole 2 weeks because they don't have anything that's not organic that they're feeding us. I think one night we said, I'd like to have a hamburger. And they said, oh, okay. So they went and got us a hamburger. It wasn't like a hamburger from McDonald's. It was a very, very, very lean cut of meat. When you bit into it, it was dense and thick. It was good, by the way. I was like, hey, we hadn't had a hamburger in like 2 weeks. This is awesome. But it was so much. Most of the food we ate was very, very organic, period. So when you come home, you got, the first thing you taste when you hit America is sugar and salt. I mean, it's not just a little bit. It's like all sugar. I might as well just took a cup of, I went to the cupboard, pulled out Dina's little thing of sugar and just started feeding myself on it because that's exactly how it is. You think I'm joking. That sounds funny. Sounds funny. But I promise you the difference between what we ate and what we ate in America was instantly just, and then just pour some salt on top of that and just eat that. That's how it was. Well, what if the word was so simple for you, it was organic? What if when you read it, it was so organic that you go, wow, I can't be fooled? That's actually how the Lord wants you to read it. And it's not about a translation. So many people get caught on translations. Oh, if this translation fits me, forget that. I grew up on King James English. And I grew up on the 6th edition of King James English. 6th edition. By the way, if you buy a Bible right now, it's King James. It's the 6th edition. It's not the first because you're not Catholic. Hold on. Let me bust a little bubble here. The King James was written by Oxford for King James. He was the next upcoming king in 1611. They wrote it before he ever became king. And then when he became king, they said, would you authorize this? What did they say? Would you sign off on it? So he signed off on it, and it became called the King James Version. It was the authorized version of the Bible. I said, it's Cambridge. Cambridge, all right? I said Oxford, it's Cambridge. And it had the hidden books in it. It had the hidden books in it. So unless you're Catholic, you don't have the hidden books. That's what they're called, the hidden books. So when all these people who are Bible thumpers have said, you got to get a good King James, they're usually quoting from the 5th or 6th edition of the King James Version. Okay? The NIV came out in the early 80s, and I remember churches burning Bibles. Burning Bibles. I don't know if you remember this. Churches would get together on a Sunday night, sometimes only the faithful, and they'd say, bring one of those heathen Bibles, and we'll burn them. That's honest God truth. And after they're done preaching, they go out in the back and they'd burn a bunch of Bibles. Do you think that's a distraction? I mean, it really is. Then I remember the Message came out in like 78 or maybe 82 or 3. The Message, Eugene Peterson. You know who Eugene Peterson is, don't you? If you don't, I had one opportunity to get to meet him, and I did it on a video conference with Brady Boyd and Jack Hayford. I was sitting in a group, a small group, not any bigger than this right here, with Eugene Peterson, Brady Boyd, Jack Hayford, and a few other guys. Those names, name dropping doesn't do any good for y'all. Y'all don't know who those are. Okay? Those are big-time names in preaching. And I happened to be invited by Brady to go to it, which he's one of my buddies. He pastored a church of 100 people in Hereford, Texas. And he said, you got to hear this, Errol. So we got the opportunity. To listen and talk back and forth with him. It was fantastic. He was in his late 80s at that time. And in the early 80s, the church he pastored, he never pastored a church over 150 people. Wait a minute. A great theologian never pastored? Yeah, up in Vermont or Rhode Island. It was up in the New England state there. It was Vermont or Rhode Island. I can't remember which state it was. Beautiful state, though. I think it's Rhode Island. Anyway, a little church. And in the 50s, he took this church right out of college. He wasn't a Bible scholar. He had the call in his life. You know what he was, though? His parents were professors of a university, and they were Greek and Hebrew scholars. So they raised him as a little boy in Greek and Hebrew. So when he read the word, he didn't just see this, he seen the Greek and Hebrew in his brain. You see what I'm saying? So when he would take the word and transfer it to teach on Wednesday nights and Sunday nights, it was simple to him. It was simple. And so he took his notes and published them. And that's what we call the Message Bible. And it wasn't until the late 80s that actually the New Testament part was done. His kids helped him get it done. He was an amazing gentleman who never pastored more than 150 people all his life, but spoke to millions and billions. See, don't ever look at the little things and get distracted. Because I got to be honest with you, if you're reading the Word, nothing is lost. Nothing is lost. I was preaching when I was a young man, and I thought I would go have breakfast with my grandmother, and she had a little group of women who are very, very conservative women. And so I'm 19, 20 years old, and I'd been preaching around a lot, and people knew me, and I was preaching in some big churches at that time. And big churches to me then was 300, 400, 500 people. And it's a good-sized church even now. But back in the late 80s, that was a good-sized church for a young minister. Very good. I preached to 20 people, and I preached to 500 people. It didn't matter. And I remember going and meeting that group, and they said, oh, my grandson's coming. It was a special event. And I was sitting there, and they said, so where are you at? What are you doing? After they chit-chatted their little thing, they had a prayer group. And I said, I've been preaching here and preaching here. And they go, oh, that's a church that preaches the perverted word. Now, I've been to that church like 5 times. I know several people there. Ain't no perverted word. It was just one lady who said that, the perverted word. And I said, I'm just going to ask you, I don't get it. Are they preaching from a Playboy? I never knew there was a perverted word. I really was serious. I don't know. I've been there several times. The pastor seems like a good guy. I've never seen him preach from a Playboy or a Hustler or something like that. No, it was the NIV. Because it doesn't use the word Virgin Mary. I said, that's only one part it uses the word Virgin Mary. And I said, wow. I got to be honest with you. I'm not trying to be rude. But is that what we're talking about? How easy is it to get distracted? And I do appreciate you, Jimmy, this morning because you didn't have the words all up there perfectly. And since you didn't have the words all up there perfectly, I said, nobody's singing those songs. Although there's some good songs, nobody's singing all the songs. Now they're singing different parts of it, and it's fantastic, but they're not singing all of it. And because it's not up there, so they don't know the song. And since they don't know the song, just to be honest for Jimmy was thrust into it. Some people have greatness. They're thrust into greatness, and some people have greatness thrust on them. It was thrust on him, and so it's just the way it is. And the funny part of that is, I sit there and I said, man, he's just preaching my sermon. Isn't that good? My sermon's about distractions. Distractions. Why? I listened to Rod Parsley, and I don't ever listen to Rod Parsley, but I got a little video clip of him. I thought I'll listen to him. Hadn't seen him in a long time. He's got a big old beard now. And Rod, back in the 80s and 90s, was a hellfire brimstone preacher. He said, I preach all over the world, and America is the emptiest churches I've ever preached in. period. He's right. Why? And he gave a lot of different reasons, which was interesting. I want to tell you, the Lord told me why. He told me why 2 or 3 weeks ago. I tried to teach this online twice, and both times the internet would not work right in Kenya. Yesterday I was supposed to be teaching this online, or Friday I was, and it didn't happen. We're distracted. Now, it's not one generation that's distracted. Everybody's got a little phone in their hand just about today. Matter of fact, if you don't have a hard copy Bible, which I always suggest you do, because you can't take good notes and write down in other Bibles, but I have notes all the way through my Bible. You know why? I don't preach. I preach on the spur of the moment so much that I need to have it right here instead of written on something else that I'll lose. So I had 10 years of notes in one Bible I gave away that was, Dina still says, it was my Bible. We shared a Bible, shared one brain for a long time. We are one. We shared a Bible, and this young minister said, could I have your preacher Bible? And I was dumb enough in 2019 to go, yeah. I had 10 years of notes on that Bible. It's like, So when I went back over last fall, not this year, but last fall, he said, I lost that. Somebody stole that Bible. I said, boy, is that worth preaching to them. He goes, you got another one? I said, nope. I'm sorry, I'm not going to give you another one. You lost the first one. I can't give you twice. 10 years of notes. Now here's my point is, it's so easy to get distracted. It's so easy to get distracted. I asked Dina this morning, I said, if you're not distracted, what are you? Don't answer it. If you're not distracted, what are you? What are you if you're not distracted? See, that's the right word, right? Everybody says focused. You're focused. Focus means you have blinders on, actually. A horse in the 1800s would have blinders on so they wouldn't get distracted, right? So we're doing this. Let's go a hair deeper, because that's the quickest answer you can give, because that sounds like the Sunday school or the third grade answer. The Bible's written on a 5th grade level, by the way, if you don't know. A 5th grade level, not a professor's level. Okay? 5th grade. Everybody's smarter than a 5th grader, right? It's so simple that you have to ask the Lord and He gives it to you. That's 5th grade. That's how He says, if you're not distracted, then what are you? Attractive. Dis means or not, or it means split. You're attractive. You're attractive. Do you know why people are getting married later and later and later? They're distracted. That's why. Dina and I, she was 18, I was 21. I was not distracted except with her. I got my work done. I called her to see how she was doing. I went to see her once a week, or she came to see me once a week. That was it. And every time I was with her, you didn't have to ask what I'm doing tonight if I'm with her. You never had to ask. We did not run around with a ton of friends outside of our date night. Now, we did beyond our date night, but in our date night, it was her and I, period. I didn't give it to anybody else. I didn't say, hey, by the way, David's coming with us tonight. What? Oh, I just want you to know David's coming with us. She didn't come to me and go, hey, by the way, Tammy and some of my other girlfriends are coming tonight with us. I would have said, well, you guys go ahead and go by yourself. That's what I would have said. Why don't you just go by yourself? Do you know when we go on a date, I stick my phone in the car and I do not answer it at the table or when we're out of the car? Most of the time, I don't even take my phone on a date. Dina just does it for emergencies because she thinks something's going to fall from the sky or something. Did you see that? You missed this. I rarely take my phone with me. So if you're dying, call Danny. I'm just kidding. I love you. We really did have a lady who was dying years ago. This was like 2007, I think is what. Had a lady dying, and they couldn't get a hold of me because I was on purposely making my girls stick their phones on the counter. And my phone was on the counter, didn't know it was dead. And I hear this, and it was Stan Irwin's who it was. He's in a t-shirt and pajamas and no shoes. He's got slippers on. And he goes, hey, dude, they're trying to call you. I said, they are? He goes, yeah, they're trying to call you. Such and such is passing away. I said, oh, okay, sorry. And I went and looked at my phone. It was like 20 calls. And it just happened to be that night. I was teaching my girls not to be distracted by the phones and do not take them to their bedrooms and all that, on and on and on. And it was when Evelyn Hendricks was passing away. And I put my clothes on. Guess what? You got a hold of me. Now, the honest truth of the matter is, we're so distracted. What is everybody distracted about right now? Can you tell me? Christmas. Do you know there's Christians right now who are standing here and they're going, we shouldn't celebrate Christmas? It's on. I refuted a few of them just because it's fun to argue. It's fun to refute, sorry. So Christmas was started because of winter solstice in the 13th century. Winter solstice was a pagan celebration full of debauchery and nudity and orgies and all kinds of stuff. You know, if I was a pagan, that would sound great, but I'm not. See, sin is fun for a season, the Bible says. But I'm not. And the church, knowing this, the Catholic Church then, 13th century, most everybody was Catholic or Greek Orthodox or Jewish or Hindu. Only a few religions at that time. There wasn't 100,000 denominations. The Catholic Church then said, let's do something to offset this. That sounds normal, right? So for a season, they started something called the Service for Christ. It was called the Service for Christ. The Mass means service for Christ, to celebrate his birthday. Now you know as well as I do, all of you know as well as I do, that Christ was born in the spring, not in the fall or winter time. But to offset this heathenistic party, we put it right before it so people would get saved. To tell about the great resurrection, the great birth of Christ, which gives us the opportunity to tell about the great resurrection of Christ. That sounds smart, doesn't it? And so the reason Santa Claus is red and white is because cardinals are red and white. And the first cardinal who was giving stuff away was dressed in red and white. That's the only reason. These are Catholic traditions. Nothing wrong with those. But we have Christians bouncing around saying, it's not good to celebrate Christmas. No, it's not good to be distracted. Now you're making a distraction from the distraction. It's not attractive. It's not attractive. Turn with me to 1 Peter. I want to get to the word. I can't see the thing back there, so I may have spent 20 minutes just telling you about those things. Doesn't really matter. You're with me, aren't you? You ain't got anywhere else to be important till 1 o'clock. Look with me, not that late. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 5. And I'm going to put my eyes on. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 5. It's going to be on the overhead too, because I don't want you to get distracted. This is the New King James Version. That's probably going to be King James. Doesn't matter. You can hang with me, can't you? Transfers. Likewise, you younger people. It's talking about me in the group. You younger people, submit yourselves to your elders. Yes, all of you be submissive to one another and be clothed with humility. Let me say it again. All of you submit to your elders. Now, when I was a child, that meant anybody older than you. Oh, man, that means my brothers even. Anyone older than you was an elder, according to the way I was told. Actually, he's talking about mentors. He's talking about mentors. Somebody who's been there, done that, and already accomplished it. I have plenty of people who are ahead of me who have no idea the things I've accomplished. And I was told when I was young, and it's a terrible thing to tell somebody this, they forgot more than you'll ever learn. Oh, that's limiting me. That was always rude when I heard that, but they have forgot more about the Bible than you'll ever learn. Really? They're not Jesus. That's my response. I was just young and dumb and smart mouth. Listen to what it says. It says, you who are young. Anybody young here? I may have white hair, but I'm young. I prematurely went white. No laughing, Blondie. I prematurely went white because of the things I've gone through. It's saying, whoever you are, make sure you have a mentor. Make sure you have someone who's ahead of you just a few years in order to gain wisdom from them, because otherwise you will be distracted. You'll be distracted. You won't be attractive. What's distracted mean? Everybody in their 20s is trying to figure out who they are, and they know everything. They just do. They know everything, don't you think? And you say, well, this generation of 20-year-olds, yeah, they don't know about life. By the time I was 25 years old, we were senior pastors for the very first time. 3 weeks later, I turned 26. We became senior pastors when we were 20. I was 25 and Dina was 22. Well, that was young. You say, well, back then, the younger people were smarter than the people now. No, they just had different opportunities. When you're in your 30s, you're trying to figure it out, and your parents get a little smarter. Literally, when you're in your 30s, your parents are getting a little bit smarter, and you're starting to say things your parents used to say. Because now you usually have kids, and they say something, because I said so. That was my mother. Or my father. You want to cry about something? I'll give you something to cry about. You know what I'm saying? Y'all never said that to your children. I'm glad. I was telling that to a friend of mine the other day, and he said, oh, we still make them cry. It's still good. Still give them some things to cry about. Not being rude or mean. Within reason. But we start mimicking our parents. Why? Because we haven't figured it all out in our 20s. And our 30s, they get a little smarter. And then in our 40s, we had better have figured something out. Now think about it when you're in your 40s. You had better have had some things figured out. Because by the time you hit your 50s and 60s, you'd have better have got there. And by the time you're 60 years old, you have better have a nest egg or something of hard investments so that you will not be able to look back and say, I wasted my 20s, 30s, and 40s, and even 50s now. I have some hard assets. Trust me, people think this way. What is the one thing you hear as a distraction on a regular basis today? I need to make money. You don't hear that out of my voice. It's not because I'm independently wealthy. Because I have to work just like anybody else does. I just work at a different level, at a different place, and a different pace than you do. Why do people say that? Because they think somewhere in their 20s and 30s, they got sidetracked thinking that this solves the problem. And all it does is grease a season. Maybe you've never had this happen. Maybe you've never had a trailer or a car that starts squeaking in one wheel. You have to take the hub off. You have to grease the bearings, slide it back on. Maybe you moms have had a door on a cabinet that every time you go, it doesn't matter what day of the time it is. You could be laying back in bed in your 20s and no big deal, and the kids are getting up and you hear, and you know they're in the kitchen in that one door. You know where they're at. How do you fix that? A little WD-40, a little 10-in-1 oil, something of that nature, right? That's just the simplest thing, right? Money is not anything but a tool that greases the squeakiness. That's all it is. It's not life. But I hear regularly people in their 50s and 60s. Well, I didn't take time when I was in my 20s and 30s. I was trying to raise a family. I didn't have anything extra to do, so I wasted it all. No, your resource is not you. Let me say, your resource is not you. Your resource is the Lord. The Lord's the one who gives everything. The Lord has the ability to give wealth or take it away. And don't think because people are rich in this life that they are happy. They just don't have the squeaky cabinet hinge. That's it. One of the favorite lines I have is when Rich Mullins writes to himself what his father would say. He went to a psychologist, a Christian counselor, And he says, what do I need to do? Because I can't get over my father's issue. And he said, you need to write a letter to yourself as though it was your father writing to you. Man, that took him a whole couple weeks. And finally, when he sat down and he read the letter to the counselor, and they're off on a retreat, and he reads this, he says, I never hated you. I just didn't know how to show you because it didn't come natural to you. I mean, he was really thinking through the process. And he said this one line that I've said a million times to Dina: being poor is nothing to be ashamed of. It's just inconvenient. I thought, that's a great statement. If I could write that, being poor, it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just inconvenient. But here's what the word says in Matthew 5. Blessed are those who are poor in spirit, for they shall be filled. Which is better, to be filled and be wealthy in the spirit, or be wealthy in this world and not have anything about Christ? What is he saying? You younger people, submit yourself to your elders. Get a mentor so you won't be distracted. You know what a mentor does? I'm just going to tell you, because I have a mentor in my life. Danny and I are buddies. We're close companions, and we can be honest with each other, but he's not my mentor. Wayne Neffen's my mentor. I can say something to Wayne, and he'll go, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. A mentor can be honest with you. Do you know what people in their 20s don't want to be? Wrong. Wrong. When you're in your 20s, 30s, or 40s, you don't want to be wrong at anything. You want to be right. You don't ever want anybody to tell you you're wrong. See, that sets us up for something else the Bible says right behind here. He says, and be submissive to one another. That's what brothers do. Be clothed with humility. Do you know what humility is? So let's go through the idea of what humility is just for a second so we can tear it apart. I like chewing on stuff, but I like it in bite-sized pieces. I can eat a big steak, but I have to have smaller bites. I just get tired of chewing, don't you? I mean, come on. It's not because I don't like steak. It's because I just get tired of the chewing. So let's take smaller bites, and it's not as hard to swallow. Humility almost always means that you're contrite, or you're bowed down, or you're less than, right? But is that actually what the Bible calls humility? That's what man calls humility. Now, I'm not saying that the process isn't that way, because when I first learned to be humble, that's how I did it. I'd be contrite. I'm so sorry. And so now we have a whole generation of women who say, every time you talk to them, I'm sorry. Quit being sorry. Come on, look around just a little bit. If somebody is going to step in front of you and you stop and you go ahead, they go, I'm sorry. Have you ever noticed that? Or when you start to say something and you fix something, go, oh, I'm sorry. Quit because we believe humility is being contrite. Humility is given in the scripture before. It's submitting to a mentor. It is when you have the chance to go first, you let somebody in front of you. If it's not that, we need to take some verses out of the Bible. The Torah, the Pentateuch that so many churches get so involved in. There's nothing wrong with the Torah. It tells the story of who Jesus is going to be. The Torah and Isaiah is all they had in the Old Covenant. And the Torah tells us of the law and tells us of the history. It tells us of the first communion in Genesis chapter 14. It tells us of how to lay out a church in Numbers 11. It tells us of who Jesus is over and over again. And then there's one man who says, the man who wrote the Torah is the most humble man of all. Wait a minute, those words are from Moses. Moses wrote, the man who wrote the Torah was the most humblest of them all. And he's the one who wrote it. Do you think he's confident in himself or in the Lord? Yeah, the Lord. So humility doesn't just mean, and actually maybe the start of it, an understanding could be contriteness or bowing, but that's not where it stops. It's letting someone else go ahead of you. Let me say it this way for you during Christmas time. The greatest way to get is to give. Let me lean this side. The greatest way to get is to give. Do you know that those who want to get don't get by going, give me, give me, give me, give me? Although it's not popular, especially in Amarillo or America. You get by asking. No, you get by giving. You get by giving. What was Mother Teresa's, some of her famous words? One of her famous words is a quote that's been quoted for millions of times. I regret that I only have one life to give. Sounds like some of our founding fathers in America. I regret that I only have one life to give. And when I get old, when I get 95, I'll say that. I regretted that I only had one life I could give, but I gave it. If you want to get in this life, give it all away. Warren Buffett, one of the wealthiest men of all time. Wealthier than the Rockefellers, by the way. If you don't know, if you never studied him. About 10 years ago, he got in a group. Well, it was a little bit longer than that, but about 10 years ago, he gave all his wealth away. 10 years ago, all of his wealth away. Left only a little bit of money for his family that was all set aside. That was it. He gave all his money away. All of it. His habits, the way he did things, the way he thought, put him back in wealth in just 5 years, in great wealth. So is it accidental that God chooses you and not you? No, Ephesians 1:6 says he favored us from the beginning of time. 1:3 says he gave you every spiritual gifting you could ever have before one click of the clock. So what is it then? It's the way we receive that messes us up. Because we don't understand humility, it's hard to live in it. He says in the next verse, God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. What is pride? Well, most people think pride is being cocky or arrogant. No, that's not what it is. Although that's the manifestation of it, that's not what it is. Pride is saying, I don't need your help, God. I can do it. That's what pride is. Pride is simply saying, listen, I've got this. You can go take a nap and let me finish. Now, what happens to a person when they tell somebody that? It's easy to resist them, isn't it? But when we preach it from the pulpit, many times we say, God resists the proud and gives grace to the humble. Then we don't know what pride and humility really is. Pride just simply says, I can do it without you, Father. Can you do anything without the Father? No. No. The reason I'm not scared to do many, many things that I get to do is because I'm not scared to ask. This morning we went to a dollar store as we were walking, and I walked in. I didn't see the lady. And I hear this, good morning. She's hiding. I think she was back around the corner, but she seen me come in. She said it real loud. And I started to walk down an aisle thinking, I think I know where I'm looking for. And I realized it's going to be, I'm not arrogant to the thought of, I know where I'm going, just leave me alone. I'm arrogant to the point is, I'm going to waste time if I don't ask. That's the honest truth. I will spend 5 extra minutes in here looking around, or I can just say, hey, ma'am. And she came out, she popped out, and I go, where are this and this and this? And she goes, back in the far corner on the bottom shelf. She knew exactly where it was at. Guess what she did? She saved me about 5 minutes worth of walking around in circles. Now that's part of learning that I don't have to be proud. Has nothing to do with being married 31 years, but it helps. It helps my marriage. I can drive through Dallas, Houston, Kansas City, just most of the major towns. Most of the major towns within the parallel of 500 to 1,000 miles, I can drive through them with. I can get there without a map. I can drive through them without a map. I can go to most of the places without a map. But although Google is right there, this generation has Google on their phone to tell them where to get home. I'm not joking. I'm telling the truth. One day, they're going to come along and there's going to be a hacker who's going to knock down all the technology, all in 24 hours. And there's going to be young adults going to work going, I don't know how to get there. Although they've been there 1,000 times, I don't know how to get there. And you who are brilliantly smart, who have a little bit of silver, I like calling it silver instead of white, a little bit of silver, we'll be able to sit down. Let me show you, son. Come here. You got a pen, piece of paper? What's that? Well, cavemen used to use it, and they would write things with it. And you'll show them how to get there on that. Whoa, wow. You mean to tell me that there are street signs that have numbers and names? Yeah. It's the craziest thing in the world. And before that, there were big rocks, and there were trees, and there were silos. I'll never forget, I was a young minister, and this little boy had drowned, and it was a pastor's son who drowned. I went to the funeral. He's a colleague. I went to the funeral. It was the saddest thing in the world. I was a young minister. I wasn't even married yet. And they said, now we're going to go up north of Perryton to a cemetery, and you're literally going to go out, and there's 2 silos. You're going to turn right there. And you're going to go down, there's this huge cottonwood tree. You're going to turn left there, and you'll catch the back of this blacktop. It's only a mile long. And the cemetery's right there. I was working with an older lady minister. I said, we going? She goes, yeah, let's go. We drove north of Perryton till we hit 2 silos, turned right. Went till we seen this huge oak tree, came up on a blacktop, turned left. And you know what? We couldn't help but run over that cemetery. It was right there. And it was about 5 miles off the highway. But that's how they described it. This generation would be lost. They have to use Google just to find themselves. They got to get this passage in them. And I don't care if you're 50, 60, 80. If you're 80 years old, you need to be looking at those who are 100 and say, how do I get there? Honest. If you're 60, you need to be looking at those who are 80 and said, how did you get to 80? I did these things. If you're 40, you need to be looking at people that are 60 and say, how did you get there? So if you're 20, you need to be looking at least at people who are 40 and say, how did you get there? The other day I was talking to my mentor, Wayne, and I said, I'm just having difficulty with this, this, and this. And he goes, don't worry, it's just a distraction. I said, the Lord's been telling me that for a while. And I said, it's because you're 20 years older than me that I can call you. He goes, hey, now wait a minute. I said, it's because you've already walked this path that I can ask you directions. It's not because you're so incredibly wonderful, although you are. It's not because of that. It's because I want to save time. If for no other reason, learn to submit so you won't waste the time that's been given to you by God. This generation right now has their heads down all the time doing this. Hang on a second. They have peripheral vision like nobody else. Do not think that somebody passing you who's swerving is drunk today. Although years ago, 7 out of 10 people on New Year's Eve are driving drunk. They're not driving drunk. They're trying to find directions home. Or they're watching a video. They got these little clips now on Facebook. I don't know if you watch Facebook. I do it just because of my friends. And the idea with your fingers is scrolling. I'm scrolling, come across a funny comedian. And I flip to the next comedian, next comedian, next comedian. And I look down and go, gee, I just spent an hour and a half doing nothing. And I throw that down and I go, I ain't going to do that again. Till the next time. See, I'm not 70 yet. He resists the proud, gives grace. Let me get to the passage that really makes sense, right? It's in verse 6. Therefore, humble yourselves, let others go first, under the mighty hand of God, that you may be exalted in due time. What's it saying? I promise you, if you sow seeds of letting someone else go ahead of you, you become attractive. So much, the Father says, he's worth investing in. He's worth investing in. Not only that, he's investing in others first. I'll give to him. People ask me all the time, I'm serious, I'm around people who are successful, and they ask me all the time on a regular basis, how is it you're so successful for what you're doing? Honest to God truth. I go, I give everything I can give away, except the things that are heritage that have to go on. But I give everything that's not heritage, that doesn't belong, I give it away. And they're like, matter of fact, when Charlie was still alive, he told me, he said, I'm not going to give you a car, although he did give me a 47 Mercury. And I got to put it together, though. It's a kit car, you have to put everything together. He said, because you'll give it away. This is my stepdad. Because you'll give it away. Then at the end, he gave me a bunch of stuff. Anything that is not to be passed on to my children, that is heritage, can be given away. And guess what God does? I'm going to fill it back up. And I turn around and give it away. I have no earthly idea how much I give away. I'm honest. Verse 7, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. He cares for you. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 21 says, don't be caught up in a snare as though some are doing. 21 through 26 says, young people get caught up in snares. It's the devil's scheme to catch you up in a snare. Do you know what happens right now with Christmas and all this distraction right now? It's just a snare. What does a snare do? All right, just think about it for just a second. What does a snare do? It's for a small animal. I tried it when I was a kid. I wrapped up, I was on a farm, so I was always trying to catch rabbits. I shoot them too, but I'd catch rabbits sometimes, and I would stick out something that they would like, and I would stick a little circle loop with a rope on it, and the problem is you had to wait on it. You had to wait for the right thing, and all of a sudden they'd step one foot in it and grab them. And then the old trappers used to do it, and they would tie it to a tree, and then all it would do is you couldn't get loose, right? That's all it would do. It's probably the cruelest thing in the whole wide world, because you'd come upon a rabbit or a small animal and they would have their leg caught and they couldn't get loose. How cruel is that? Can't eat, can't drink, and it may be 3 or 4 days before the trapper would get back to it. It's cruel, isn't it? He says young people who don't listen are caught up in the snares of the enemy. Does that make sense? Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 says, you have this great cloud of witnesses. Amen? Y'all are awful quiet now. You were good with me when I was telling other stories, but now you're getting quiet. Have this great cloud of witnesses, and don't be ensnared in sin again. Why? Because you have conquered sin. Romans 6 says you have conquered sin. Don't get snared. Don't get caught up in it for 3 or 4 days and can't get loose. It's a distraction. Verse 7, casting all your care upon him. What do you care? What kind? He'll exalt you in due time. Quit getting distracted with money. Quit getting distracted with things. For I'll give you anything you want. I'll give you anything you want, but you don't seek the kingdom. You seek the church. You seek other people. Look with me in Psalms 55:22. The last verse I'll give you. I had it marked and I think I lost it. Oh, there it is. Psalms 55:22. I like hearing pages turn. That's always good. Cast your burden on the Lord, and he shall sustain you. He shall never permit the righteous to be moved. You ever had a temptation in front of you? Boy, I have. I have had lots of temptations over the years. Nothing wrong with temptation. There's wrong with falling for it. It's when you engage in that temptation. When you see a temptation, turn away from it. It's not the temptation that gets you in trouble. It's the lure of yourself into the temptation. When a temptation comes, he will sustain you so that you will not fall for it. What is a burden? What is a burden? Something heavy you're carrying, isn't it? Can't get it off your mind. Can't get it off your mind. It's a yoke you're not supposed to take. What do you say? My yoke is easy and my burden is light. That's the lifestyle we're supposed to live. So when he says cast all your cares, that word cares right there is not worries or hurt. It could be. It's distractions. It's distractions. The other day, Dean and I went and did our Christmas shopping. It's all done. For years, and I know some of y'all are going to boo me for this, so I don't really care. I don't care if you boo me or not on this. And Dean and I haven't bought a gift for each other in 20 years. Yeah. She's the only one saying boo now. We have not bought a gift. And originally it was because the girls were young and we just didn't have the money to buy more than just for the girls. But we realized if we want something, we go buy it. I'm just being honest. I didn't have to save up all this money to go, hey, baby, I bought you a necklace. No, when we were young, we did it. And she's got some fine jewelry. She's got jewelry from all around the world. We don't buy each other gifts at Christmas. We buy everybody else their stuff. So the other day, I said, he got me for one day. One day only sale. So I went with her. I think it was afternoon. It wasn't in the morning. I was busy that morning, and by 1 o'clock, I said, I'm ready to go. Whatever you want, baby. And we went and bought everything we needed for Christmas. And we didn't spend $1 million. Got everything. Some of them 2 and 3 things. We came back home. We piled it all up. And by that time, it was 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And I said, I am done. Went to bed. The next morning, I got up at 8 o'clock or 7:30, actually by 5 or 6 o'clock. But by 7:30, I'd had my coffee and everything. And I pulled out, cleaned everything off the counter, and I wrapped all the presents for all the boys. Threw them underneath the tree and said, done, I win. True story. I choose not to make distractions as big as they are. But there are sometimes I do. This morning I looked over here and I said, why is that over there? And he said, I don't know. Do you know people who have brains like I have are easily distracted? They just are. They see the slightest thing. And if you don't learn to control that and give it to the Lord, it will take over you. The biggest distraction I've ever done in my life that I can think of, is taking something somebody said and sharing it that I shouldn't have shared. Taking information about someone and then sharing it with someone else. And I've always joked that you never have to worry about me getting information. It's the people I tell. I want you to think about it. That's the only time I've ever had to go back and apologize, actually. That's the only distraction that kept me awake or asleep at night. I'm not talking about issues in life. I'm talking about distractions. It's taking something somebody said and being goaded out to say it to someone else. And then I wish I could just suck the air back in and it'd all be gone. But you know what? Every time I ever spoke it out, I wound up coming back and having to apologize. Every single time. You know why? Because something I say in private typically needs to stay private. Otherwise, it becomes a distraction. You know where I learned that from? People are ahead of me 20 years. It's worthwhile. We're going to take a minute here. I know I've preached to you long enough. Taught for a good while. But would you take just a minute, because I know some of you, just like me, you need prayer. You need to sink things in. So I want to pray for you, and then I'm going to release you to prayer. I'm going to release you to prayer. Father, I ask you right now. There's so many things that we get tied up with that don't have much weight or worthwhileness. Will you allow us today, amazingly, to lighten this burden by praying and releasing it? And Lord, I ask you just to bring it up right now. Bring it up to our minds. I trust you with this. I'm not proud. I trust you with this. I'll let them go ahead of me. And today I ask you, show me your goodness. Some of you, maybe your children, your grandchildren, sisters, brothers. It could be life. It could be that you haven't heard the Lord's voice in a while and you need to for this decision. Whatever it is, cast that distraction on Him, for He cares for you today. Amen. If you need prayer, there are going to be people praying for you, waiting to pray for you. Step on out, go back and get prayer. As we continue, listen to this song, let it sink into your heart.